Hi students, welcome to lesson number 4, Scientific Methodology. Let us look into the introduction. Research involves scientific method. All sciences, whether natural or social, follow similar methods of studying phenomena, but their materials differ. As their materials are different, their purposes also differ. Studying, observing the phenomena and analyzing to find out its sequences is called scientific method. Research itself is scientific endeavor. Scientific method is a procedure or mode of investigation. Science deals with knowable universe for its subject. Science is independent of any particular subject matter. It deals with physical as well as psychological processes, with man as well as with nature. The term scientific method emerged in the 19th century when a significant institutional development of science was taking place and terminologies establishing clear boundaries between science and non-science, such as scientist and pseudoscience, appeared throughout the 1830s and 1850s, by which time Baconianism was popular. Naturalists like William Whewell, John Herschel, John Stuart Mill engaged in debates over induction and facts and were focused on how to generate knowledge in the late 19th-20th centuries. A debate over realism versus anti-realism was conducted as powerful scientific theories extended beyond the realm of observable. The term scientific method came into popular use in the 20th century, popping up in dictionaries and science textbooks, although there was little scientific consensus over its meaning. Although there was growth through the middle of 20th century, by the 1960s and 1970s, numerous influential philosophers of science such as Thomas Kuhn and Paul Feyerabend had questioned the universality of the scientific method, and in doing so largely replaced the notion of science as a homogeneous and universal method with that of it being a heterogeneous and local practice. In particular, Paul Feyerabend, in the 1975 first edition of his book Against Method, argued against there being any universal rules of science. Later examples include physicist Lee Semoulin's 2013 essay There is no scientific method, and historians of science Daniel 𝗧 chapter in the 2015 book Newton's Apple and Other Myths About Science, which concluded that the scientific method is a myth or at best an idealization. Philosopher Robert Nolah and Howard Sankey in their 2007 book Theories of Scientific Method said that debates over scientific method continue, and argued that Feyerabend, despite the title Against Method, accepted certain rules of method and attempted to justify those rules with a meta-methodology. The scientific method is the process by which science is carried out. As in other areas of inquiry, science through the scientific method can build on previous knowledge and develop a more sophisticated understanding of its topics of study over time. The ubiquitous element in the scientific method is empiricism. This is in opposition to stringent forms of rationalism. The scientific method embodies that reason alone cannot solve a particular scientific problem. A strong formulation of the scientific method is not always aligned with a form of empiricism in which the empirical data is put forward in the form of experience or other abstracted forms of knowledge. In current scientific practice, however, the use of scientific modeling and reliance on abstract typologies and theories is normally accepted. The scientific method is of necessity also an expression of an opposition to claims that, example, revelation, political or religious dogma, appeals to tradition, commonly held beliefs, common sense, or importantly currently held theories are the only possible means of demonstrating truth. To study the meaning of scientific method, to examine the conditions of scientific method, to know the essentials of scientific method. Let us understand the meaning of scientific method. The scientific method is a systematic step-by-step procedure following the logical processes of reasoning. Scientific method is a means for gaining knowledge of the universe. The scientific method is an empirical method of acquiring knowledge that has characterized the development of science since at least the 17th century. It involves careful observation, applying rigorous skepticism about what is observed, given that cognitive assumptions can distort how one interprets the observation. A method of procedure that has characterized natural science since 17th century, consisting in systematic observation, measurement and experiment, and the formulation, testing and modification of hypotheses. The scientific method will help to focus on fair project question, construct a hypothesis, design, execute and evaluate experiment. It is important for an experiment to be a fair test. A fair test occurs when change only one factor, that is variable, and keep all other conditions the same. Criticism is the backbone of the scientific method. It is an objective, logical and systematic method of analysis of phenomena devised to permit the accumulation of reliable knowledge. It is a systematized form of analysis. It is featured by an intellectual attitude. Scientific method is defined as, according to Professor Morgan, scientific method being highly elastic can be applicable to all domain of human activity where the discovery of truth is the objective. According to Carl Pearson, the scientific method is one and the same in all branches, and that method of all logically trained minds. The unity of all sciences consists alone in their method, not in their materials. The man who classifies facts of any kind whatever, who sees their mutual relation, describes their sequence, is a man of science. The facts may be related to any field. It is not the facts themselves which make science, but the method by which they are dealt with. Science is not wrapped up with any particular body of facts. Science is independent of any particular subject matter. Let us study the characteristics of scientific method. The characteristics of scientific method are as follows. 1. It is a way of testing opinion, impressions or guess by examining available evidences. 2. It aims at discovering facts. 3. Corrective in nature. 4. It is based on systematic doubts. 5. Scientific theory is abstract in nature. Let us look into the conditions of scientific method. There are some conditional bases on which scientific method is based on. They are as follows. 1. Reliance on empirical evidence. 2. Use of relevant concepts. 3. Commitment to objectivity. 4. Ethical neutrality. 5. Generalization. 6. Verifiability. 7. Logical reasoning process. 1. Reliance on evidence. Scientific method involves a systematic process. Truth is established on the basis of evidence. Conclusion is admitted only when it is based on evidence. The answer to a question are given only after the relevant data are collected by observation or experimentation. The validity and the reliability of data are checked carefully and the data are analyzed thoroughly using the apt methods of analysis. Conclusion is reached on the basis of the result of analysis, not by intuition or imagination. 2. Use of concepts. In order to deal with the facts we experience through our senses which exist in reality, we use concepts with specific meanings. Concepts are logical constructs or abstractions which are created from sense impressions, percepts and experiences. They are symbols representing the meaning that we hold. People use them in their thinking and communication. Otherwise, we may not reach to a clear and correct understanding. 3. Commitment to objectivity. In scientific method, there is commitment to objectivity. Objectivity is considered as the hallmark of the scientific method. Objectivity means forming a judgment upon facts unbiased by personal impressions. Objectivity is the willingness and ability to examine evidence dispassionately. In order to check that the conclusion should be the same for all persons, a person of science must strive at self-elimination in his judgment and provide an argument which is true for each individual mind as his own. 4. Ethical neutrality. Science does not say that facts are good or bad. It does not pass normative judgment on facts. Science never imposes anything. Science states science aims at nothing but making true and adequate statements about its objects, says Schrödinger. 5. Generalization. Scientists aim at discovering under the surface layer of diversity the thread of uniformity. Around a discovered uniformity, a logical class and its observed pattern, a descriptive generalization is formulated. Scientists are not concerned with isolated events. In formulating a generalization, they avoid the danger of committing the particularistic fallacy. The fallacy arises through an inclination to generalize on insufficient or incomplete and unrelated data. In order to avoid this fallacy, the accumulation of a large body of data and by the employment of comparison and control groups. 6. Verifiability. The conclusions arrived at by a scientist should be verifiable. He should show to others how he arrived at his conclusions. He should expose his own methods and conclusions to critical scrutiny. When the conclusions are tested by others under the same conditions, it must be accepted as correct. Such verification may either confirm established conclusions or modify them or even invalidate them. 7. The process of logical reasoning. The reasoning process in scientific method is used for drawing inferences from the finding of a study or arriving at conclusion. The logical reasoning process consists of induction and deduction methods. A. Induction method. One of the logical reasoning process methods is induction. In this method, several individual cases are studied and generalizations are drawn. Induction consists of two processes, A. Observation and B. Generalization. Conclusions drawn from induction are tentative inferences and they are subject to further confirmation based on evidence. In research, when new facts, new truths and new generalizations are to be formulated, this method is followed. For example, the application of recommended dosage of chemical fertilizers results in an increase in the yield per hectare. A sample of experimental farms and control farms is selected in an area. In the experimental farms, the chemical fertilizer is applied and in controlled farms it is not applied, but other conditions like quality of seeds, irrigation, cultural practice, etc. are the same. After the harvest, the average yield per hectare is computed for experimental and control groups and the hypothesis is tested. For the analysis, the inductive method is used. There are 4 essential conditions for a proper induction. They are as follows. A. In order to avoid mistakes while conducting experiments or interviews and faulty recordings of the information which can be vitiate the values of any conclusions reached, observation must be correctly performed and recorded and data collected should be accurate. B. When induction method is used, it is essential to make sure that observation should cover representative cases drawn from a specific universe. For example, in a survey of efficiency and job satisfaction in an organization, the universe from which a sample has to be drawn should be defined exactly. Employees of an organization in a specific geographical area and all cadres of employees should be included in the sample, and an appropriate sampling method like stratified random sampling has to be adopted. C. It is essential to see that observations must cover an adequate number of cases for which the size of sample must be large enough to make it representative and to get reliable result. D. In induction method, conclusions reached after an analysis of data collected on a given study must be confined to the inferences drawn from the findings only. Conclusions should not be generalized to apply to types of cases not covered in the sample. There are two types of induction. They are, according to ثيودوسن and ثيودوسن, 1. Enumerative and 2. Analytic induction. In enumerative induction, which is the most common form of induction used in social science research, involves generalization from samples, and the generalizations are usually derived through the analysis of the data. Analytic induction, which involves case by case analysis of specific features. The step by step procedure of analytic induction are: A. which defines the phenomena to be explained, B. for explanation of phenomena, hypothesis formulated, C. a case is studied to determine whether hypothesis fits in the case, D. hypothesis is either reformulated or redefines the phenomena so that the case is excluded in which hypothesis does not fit into the facts. E. to get practical certainty, a few cases are to be examined. When a negative case disproving the explanation is discovered, reformulate the hypothesis. F. until a universal relationship is established, continues the procedure of examining cases, redefining the phenomena and reformulating the hypothesis. G. the cases outside the area circumscribed by the definition to determine whether or not the final hypothesis applies to them or not, to get the proof. B. Deduction method. This is a method in which the reasoning process of applying a general acceptable principle to a specific individual case falling under the general principle. It is regarded as reasoning from the general to the particular. This reasoning establishes a logical relationship between a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. Previously established generalization or assumption is a major premise. A particular case related to the major premise is a minor premise. The logical relationship of these premises leads to conclusion. Through the deductive method, which moves from the general assumption to the specific application, is useful for solving problems. It is not useful in arriving new truths. The essential conditions needed for valid deduction are: 1. the assumption of the general rule must be correct. 2. the general rule is applied only to the cases which correctly fall under it. The conclusion cannot be correct if the general rule or the major premise is not correct. For example, the deduction goes in this manner: major premise, all organization employees are insincere. Minor premise, Gautam is an employee in organization. Conclusion, Gautam is insincere. If both the premises are accepted as true, only then the conclusion is justified. Since the major premise is not true, the conclusion is defective, even if Gautam turns out to be insincere. Importance of induction and deduction methods. The two logical methods of induction and deduction processes are useful in research studies. They are inseparable parts of a reasoning system. In other words, the distinct processes of inductive and deductive reasoning do not exist. Both processes are often used simultaneously. When a puzzling condition occurs, one seeks inductively to explain by a hypothesis. The hypothesis is used in the deduction of facts which can confirm or deny the truth of hypothesis. For example, the managing director of an enterprise observes that profits are lower than expected. Fact, he thinks what is the cause. His tentative conclusion, hypothesis, is lower profits are due to fall in sales. He examines the sales records, finds that the actual sales volume is lower than the budgeted figure, that is the fact. This fact confirms his hypothesis. Now, the second question raised was, why is sales volume low? Recalling that there had been some problem of competition, he infers the hypothesis, competition accounts for a fall in sales. He will analyze the market reports received from the regional offices and verify the truth of this hypothesis. This process of fact question, hypothesis, detected fact, confirmation question and so on may be continued till the final explanation is arrived at. Let us look into the scientific enquiry. The scientific enquiry generally aims to obtain knowledge in the form of testable explanations that scientists can use to predict the results of future experiments. This allows scientists to gain a better understanding of the topic under study and later to use that understanding to intervene in its causal mechanisms. The better an explanation is at making predictions, the more useful it frequently can be and the more likely it will continue to explain a body of evidence better than its alternatives. The most successful explanations, those which explain and make accurate predictions in a wide range of circumstances, are often called scientific theories. The most experimental results do not produce large changes in human understanding. Improvements in theoretical scientific understanding typically result from a gradual process of development over time, sometimes across different domains of science. Scientific models vary in the extent to which they have been experimentally tested and for how long and in their acceptance in the scientific community. In general, explanations become accepted over time as evidence accumulates on a given topic, and the explanation in question proves more powerful than its alternatives at explaining the evidence. Often subsequent researchers reformulate the explanations over time or combined explanations to produce new explanations. Let us look into the requirements for a good scientific method. The requirements of a good scientific method according to Advisory Committee of Economic and Social Research of the Council of Social Research are: 1. A logical analysis of the problem, separating its elements and formulating hypotheses. 2. To give clear understanding and be able to repeat the analysis and test the generalizations. The unambiguous definition of terms and concepts and statistical units and measures are given. 3. Collection of data related to the problem under study. Classifying the data. 4. Whenever possible, expression of variables in quantitative terms. 5. Exacting experimental or statistical procedure in summarizing the data and in isolating the attributes or variables and measuring their relationship and inter-effects. 6. Logical reasoning to test the hypothesis and draw generalizations. 7. From the findings, giving the statements of conclusions. 8. Statements of generalizations to facilitate checking and testing by others. 9. Reporting of the research process, definitions and the methods of analysis so that others can check the analysis or test generalizations with new sets of data. Let us study the elements of scientific approach. The elements of scientific approach are: 1. The procedural and 2. The personal element. A. Procedural element. The procedural element of scientific method comprises the important steps. They are as follows: A. Define the problem, establish hypothesis to show the cause, explanations and solutions of the problem, collect the data and analyze the data to test the hypothesis and draw inferences. The researcher must have the knowledge of the subject matter of the problem in order to formulate a conceptual model for its study. Researcher must operationalize the concepts for determining the requirements of the data and elect appropriate methods for data collection, using relevant statistical techniques and test for testing hypothesis. All these are the requirements needed in a researcher for a creative imagination and extraordinary care and patience. The personal element. To find out the hearts of the problem, it needs a creative imagination, extraordinary care and patience, analytical ability, resourcefulness and skill. Researchers' ability and attitude are more important than the method of approach. researcher should have an objective scientific and personal qualification and personal quality and interest. Let us look into the attitude for the scientific method. The attitude for the scientific method is based on complexity of elements. They are the consistent thinking, the objective, dispassionate and unbiased devotion to collection and treatment of facts, overcoming personal preconceptions and value judgments as they may affect the data and also harmful effects. The researcher should avoid personal and vested interest or preferences or preconceived notions of men in power. The researcher should avoid wishful thinking, analysis with stubborn determination based on evidence, tests and proofs, scientists showing faith in the universality of cause and effect, researcher maintaining curiosity, imagination and interest in experimental inquiry with an open mind. All these elements tend to correct the factual error, also the mental, emotional and volitional frailties of a research worker. Let us examine the common mistakes which are done in the scientific method. The scientific method reduces the influence of the outcome of an experiment. The most fundamental error is to make hypothesis for an explanation of a phenomena without performing experimental test. Another common mistake is to rule out data which do not support hypothesis. For an experiment, there is possibility that the hypothesis is correct or incorrect. In that case, there may be a psychological tendency to find something wrong, while data which do agree with those expectations may not be checked as carefully. The one quantitatively a systematic error is another common mistakes in the scientific method. There may be examples of discoveries which were missed by experimenters, and there are many examples of alleged new discoveries which later proved the systematic error and not accounted by the discoveries. 2. The value related problem. It arises from the social context within which research occurs. A researcher's attitudes towards socio-economic issues are influenced by his values. 3. The personal preconception. Personal preconceptions of research create not only a distorting effect on the data, but are also highly insidious. Research fails to examination objectivity. 4. Ethical dilemmas. Research relation with other aspect of research creates ethical problems. For example, relation with sponsors, relation with source of data, relation with research subject, etc. Let us now discuss about the problems faced in the use of scientific method. The problems are: in the application of scientific methods in social science, some major difficulties are: the human behavior is not uniform and predictable. When human behavior is studied and analyzed by another human, there may be personal problems. The psychological nature of human behavior is not measurable. In this lesson, we have come across the scientific method. It is a step-by-step procedure following the logical processes of reasoning. Scientific method is a means for gaining knowledge of the universe, a method of procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century, consisting in systematic observation, measurement and experimentation, and the formulation, testing and modification of hypotheses. It is a way of testing opinion, impressions or guess by examining available evidences. It aims at discovering facts. It is a corrective in nature. It is based on systematic doubts, and scientific theory is abstract in nature.